I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Hope believed in me, pull up through some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the circle up to some bucks down. Basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best for my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify tap, you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for their prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the leaders he was planning. I had them all line before I dialed up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dialed up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. Boy, that flight to Amsterdam. Well, my accountant of mine, that's my family found out too and didn't like it. You're not in the salon with Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a Venmo that said copy the finest. Before my foolishness settled in, recorded a whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up and now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word, never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up under their nose to fight a facade. Off the cliff with broken wings, I'm aware of the odds. Enough faith for us all, I'm the one for the job. Most days, catching sun rays, baby, look like the front page. Overthinking what they might say, have it your way, yeah. The biggest threat is something they never seen. Dial it up, patch me into the screen. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up.
What is going on, everyone in Lukman Nation? How you doing? It's Jackie Lukman, and welcome to an impromptu live in Lukman Nation. I know didn't give you a whole lot of notice, but I just had some stuff on my mind, and I felt like I had to just get it out because the past few days have been really interesting. They've, of course, been very tumultuous for some people, I guess. They've been very shocking for some people, I suppose. And, a lot of people are frightened and whatever it is people feel about the, what am I calling it today? The MAGA riot at the U.S. Capitol. I don't even want to talk about that because that's not the thing that has concerned me so much over the past few weeks, really, not just days. I've been really blown away by some of the conversations that I've had with progressives, so-called progressives, over the past few weeks since the election. And I've been thinking about these things and have noticed them for quite some time. And I think that 2021 is finally going to be the year that I really just let go of progressives, because a whole lot of progressives are just a mess, just an absolute mess. Aside from the fact that the lack of organization outside of online is a big issue that we've talked about before. There are a bunch of other issues that really just blew my mind, especially since the election that I want to get into. But before I do, thank you all so much for joining me for this impromptu show. As always, you can follow Lukman Nation on Patreon, patreon.com/Lukman Nation, LUQMANNATION. You can follow us on Twitter, Lukman Nation, the number one, no spaces. You can like us on Facebook, Coffee, Current Events and Politics in Lukman Nation. And you can subscribe to us here on YouTube. You should subscribe to us on YouTube here in Lukman Nation. Share this video if you think this will be important or edifying or entertaining viewing for your friends and even people that you don't agree with, and invite folks. And come on, let's get into this. I see folks over in the chat. What's going on? Neil and Joel and Dolores and Leah. Yes, you're in the house. So glad to see you. Let me get into this because I have notes, y'all. I have notes. This is how upset I am. I usually do have a little script and have notes, but I really had to get all my thoughts down in kind of an organized, orderly fashion. I had to give Brewski a napkin so that he would not bother me. He likes napkins and tissues, so I just let him have them. So that I keep my thoughts in a straight line. This whole idea of progressivism politically, yeah, I guess it's a good idea that, we vote for policies that move us toward a more equal and just society, that we progress toward a more equal and just society. That's the whole idea behind progressivism, that we move toward more equality and justice and advancements and human rights and science and, economic equality. It's the progression toward those things that the policies are supposed to reflect. That's the idea of progressive policies. The problem that I've noticed with some folks online, and maybe I will readily admit this is probably a function of me spending way more time online, going back and forth with people than I should. I will readily admit that that's probably true. But I've noticed over the past few years, and I'm talking about like since 2016, the propensity for a whole lot of progressives, too many progressives, especially white progressives, to side with the right wing for my comfort. And it should make everyone uncomfortable. But it hasn't made too many people uncomfortable until now. And that's kind of the crazy thing to me, that I witnessed and was involved in a whole bunch of ridiculous arguments with white progressives online about how bad and dangerous right-wing folks are. But you had progressives talking about how, well, we can agree on Medicare for all if people on the right want Medicare for all. Well, that's fabulous that they want Medicare for all, but once they get free health care, then they're going to go right back to wanting to kill people who look like me. And that didn't matter to a lot of progressives. That didn't resonate with them. That wasn't like a thing where they were like, that's a good point. Maybe it's not a good idea that we unite with folks on the right to get Medicare for all. Maybe we should unite with working class, poor, and oppressed Black, brown, indigenous folks. Maybe we should, work on organizing with them. But no. Too many progressives were still really married to the idea of working with the right to get their policies passed that they found out about from Bernie Sanders. Let's be real, even though Sanders wasn't the one who came up with any of those policies. But, over the course of that time, there were other examples of the kind of misdirected, misguided, lack of any clear, serious ideology that a whole lot of white folks in the progressive movement had, like this idea of a red-brown alliance. I just hinted at it a little bit, that progressives can work with the right to get certain policies passed. Obviously, that's dangerous for folks who are not white, who are not cisgendered, who are not immigrants, who are not disabled. But we didn't have, we couldn't, it was like progressives didn't want to hear that. They just believed that, we could work with some folks on the right to get these policies passed. And then it got so bad that there were people online who were very influential then and became very influential since then, who were laughing at and mocking the alt-right torch march on the campus of, I think it was the University of Virginia, right before Charlottesville happened. Do you remember that? When the neo-Nazis marched on the college campus and they trapped a bunch of anti-racist activists inside a church on the campus with their tiki torches, marching at night, marching and chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And there were folks online saying, well, you just need to ignore those people. They're just a bunch of clowns. Just don't give them any attention. Don't give them the attention that they deserve, don't give them the attention that they want. And we tried to explain to these progressives then that, look, these people don't care if you pay attention to them or not. Their goal is to kill us. And they don't care if you're not watching. As a matter of fact, they want you not to be watching so that there's no witness to what they do. So fast forward from 2016, 2017, here we are, 2021, and what just happened 6 days ago? Some of these very people, some of these very factions with the very same ideology that we were trying to tell white progressives who were like, oh, they're just a bunch of clowns. Haha, they're not that serious. We've got more important things to focus on. Now they've caused the deaths of 5 people at the Capitol, at the US Capitol. Not only that, but they have consistently committed acts of violence against anti-racist, Black Lives Matter, anti-fascist protesters all throughout the summer, all across the country, all over the country. There have been, I think, upwards of 100 vehicle attacks on these protests, 97% of which have been peaceful, by the way. Since people are so enamored with peaceful protest when it comes to us, right? But I didn't see a whole lot of these progressives online talking very much, the same folks who said that the tiki torch wielding neo-Nazis in polo shirts weren't a threat and we should just not take them seriously. I didn't see a whole lot of them saying a whole lot about the white supremacists, the white nationalists, the private citizens assaulting Black and allies in protests over the summer. They didn't say too much about that. Other than, and the thing about this summer that was really interesting, on the one hand, we saw in the largest protest movement in the history of this country, actually, we saw a lot more white people coming out and joining in these protests than a lot of times there were Black people. And that was a great thing because we've all been sitting at home in the pandemic and watching a whole lot more TV and news, and we've had the undivided attention so that all of us saw what happened to George Floyd. And we all saw it over and over again on the repeat reel. And the more we watched it, the more white people realized, okay, that's fucked up. The more white people could, I'm sure white people were, every other time, they were trying to find every excuse in the world for why it was justified that the police would shoot like Walter Scott in the back while he was running away. Well, he shouldn't have run. or would roll up on Tamir Rice, a little child playing in a park, and shoot him within 3 seconds. Well, he shouldn't have been playing with a toy gun. And there was outrage about Ahmaud Arbery's murder, but that kind of waned because people were like, some people were like, well, maybe he should have stopped and explained himself to the people. I think a whole lot of white people have been given a lot of space to make excuses for why they just didn't want to believe the injustices that were committed against Black and Indigenous and other people by the police were exactly what they said they were until George Floyd, when most of the country, undivided attention, you couldn't look away. That man, the cop knelt on that man's neck for 8 minutes, knelt on his neck with his hands in his pockets, looking around with 3 other cops kneeling on the rest of his body, looking around as the crowd is telling him, yo, man, get off this man's neck, and listening to this man's dying words. I mean, you can't get much more depraved than that. And I think it was in that moment that many white people saw the depravity of that 400 or 500 years of history of abuse and brutality and genocide reflected in that one cop and those other 3 accomplices to George Floyd's murder. And they couldn't help but to realize, okay, we have to do something about this. We're angry about this now. And I think a lot of that anger was in the fact that they didn't believe us for so long, that they ignored us for as long as they did. And a part of, I think, a lot of the protests were, white people involved in the protests were certainly recognizing the injustice finally, but also a sense of guilt in having ignored it this long. So, it was wonderful to see so many more white people out here this summer, but you just didn't see a lot of reporting in the media about the consistent attacks on those protesters, not just by the cops, but by random everyday white folks showing up fully armed with guns and baseball bats and golf clubs and assaulting people. And I will never forget, you need to look this up. There was a Black Lives Matter protest. Our dog is rooting around back here. Come here. Sit down. Thank you. The Black Lives Matter protest, yes, I love you too. Black Lives Matter protest in the little town of Bethel, Ohio. And it was like 2 or 3 white people, young kids who stood on the side of the sidewalk on like one of the main thoroughfares and held up a Black Lives Matter sign. And they were descended upon by white people from the town, by white people from neighboring towns. Some people had come from 70 or 100 miles away just to confront and harass and assault those 2 or 3 little white kids who were out there standing up for Black Lives Matter. Look that up, please do. So it's been interesting to see what we knew was going to happen with the police and in responding to these protests, but it was interesting to see the lack of progressives who were so convinced that, these tiki torch carrying neo-Nazis in polo shirts weren't a threat and they were just clowns that we should ignore. It was interesting to see their silence as the same kinds of folks literally attacked demonstrators during the summer, all summer long. It blew my mind how there was so much silence in the online progressive circles about that. And then the election comes along, and people, some of these same progressives, after we have all the arguments about whether people should vote for Biden or not, I don't even want to talk about that. That's not what I want to talk about either. That's another day. But the gall of some progressives to tell me and other Black people that there is a credible threat of violence coming from some of these Trump supporters, because these people are not just, having to listen to progressives talk about, well, maybe we can reach out to them if we just explain. Maybe we can find common ground with them if, because they're poor white people too. If we look at the folks who came to DC, and you realize that hotels like the Hyatt Washington were sold out, full of Trump supporters. That's not a cheap hotel. These folks ain't poor. I'm sure there were some poor white people in that crowd, and I know that there are poor white people who do support Donald Trump, absolutely. But how many polls do you need that show that a large segment of Trump's base are actually quote unquote middle class, college educated, financially secure folks who are capitalists and who really just like making money and are not even at all interested in anyone else getting any more of anything as long as they keep their money? But we couldn't reason with these progressives on this idea that there's, if we could just reason with these poor white Trump voters. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't make the effort, that we put the information out there about class warfare. I think we do, but I don't think we go chasing after poor white people who vote for Trump, or chasing after Trump voters just because we think they're all poor white people. Because what happened at the Capitol is what was going to happen to a lot of progressives. They're going to get their asses handed to them, and then they're going to wonder why. How can we not agree on class? Because a lot of these Trump voters are not poor. They're not working class. They don't have the same class consciousness that you're supposed to, that you and I are supposed to share. So, so there was that issue with the election. And then, you have progressives since the election happened. And this is just such a weird flex. I don't even know how to explain this without really. It is true that I believe what Malcolm X said, that I am for the truth no matter who tells it. So if there were evidence, if there were proof, and I talked about this a little bit on another show earlier last week, where Tucker Carlson wrote an article on the Fox News website where he talked about the way the Democratic Party rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders. Now, that is absolutely true. I'm not going to deny that that's true just because Tucker Carlson said it. That's true. They did. And I believe that is one of the reasons why Donald Trump is president and nobody else, because if the Democratic Party had left Bernie Sanders' campaign alone, I believe Bernie Sanders might have been president. I think he would have won the nomination if certain other factors were handled by the Sanders campaign the way they should have been. We've talked about that before too. But the problem with what Tucker Carlson says, and folks like him on the right say, about the rigging of the primaries that the Democratic Party did, is that they use that truth to justify the false claims of a rigged general election, or a stolen, now let me not use the word rigged, a stolen general election that was stolen from Donald Trump. That's the problem, because there is no evidence that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. And we need to be clear on that. Not only did states like Georgia recount their ballots 3 times in order to find some evidence of fraud, of election fraud, and one of those counts was done by hand. But other states also recounted or audited their election results. And no states found any widespread election fraud. There are not 11,780 ballots, votes to be found that will flip the election to Donald Trump. There are not. What, 60, 70 lawsuits the Trump campaign has filed in multiple courts. Some of those courts are presided over by judges that Donald Trump himself appointed to the bench. Are they in on it too? Are they in on the steal too? The Trump appointed judges, the ones who also threw all of the cases out of their courts, are they in on the steal? I mean, I'm not saying that it's out of the realm of possibility, but at some point, you really just have to look at all of the mounting evidence or lack thereof and say, okay, yes, irregularities do happen in every election. And they do happen in every election, especially in this country, because each state has its own election laws because of that whole states' rights business, right? Because these white people didn't want a federal standard for anything. White people didn't want the federal government telling them how to do their business in their states. So each state now has their own election laws and have for centuries. So now the the descendants of those people and the genetic and the ideological descendants of those people who fought a war so that they would not have to listen to federal law in regard to slavery because they wanted to keep slavery. The genetic and ideological descendants of those people are now saying, well, we don't like the fact that each state has its own laws, election laws. There needs to be a federal standard. So now they don't like states' rights. And when you look at just that one thing, the hypocritical nature of the argument of the right about this election, I don't understand how progressives can look at anything they say about this election being stolen and be like, yup, it was. I agree. You know why? Because the Democrats rigged the primaries, because that's what's happening. That is what's happening. I've seen this I had to unfriend a couple of people because they were all in on, because the Democrats rigged the primaries, the Trump supporters are right that the election was stolen from Trump. And they use crazy logic that, okay, I'm not a statistician. I did not do well in math. I'm not a political scientist. I can just kind of draw a straight line between A and B. And some things really just, I don't understand how people use the logic that they do. And by people, I do mean progressives who are agreeing with Trump supporters on this election being stolen. Because one of the arguments is that because Biden won let me start with this. One of the arguments is that the media is saying that Joe Biden is the most popularly elected president in the history of elections, and that he won by 10 million more votes than Barack Obama did. And they're getting hung up on a couple of things. Number one, the media is saying that Biden is the most popularly elected president, and they are mistaking that phrase, which of course is a media spin headline. It's an attention-grabbing headline. They're using that phrase and misinterpreting it to suggest that Biden is the most popular president. That's not what that means when the media says that. They are saying that Biden has won the largest share of the popular vote than any other president in the history of elections, which, okay, if people want to argue with that, all right, that's fine. But then the reasoning that they use to argue that is also kind of weird to me when you sit down and really think about the population of this country and the population distribution of this country, right? Because the thing that people are hung up on is that Biden can't be the most popularly elected president if he won 300 fewer districts than Obama did when Obama won his last election. On the surface, that would seem to make sense. How do you get more votes than a candidate that won 300 more districts than you won? That, on the surface, that does raise questions until you understand a little thing called population distribution. There are states in this country that are so sparsely populated where, I mean, literally, there are almost no Black people. When you look at the Midwest, and if you go, and I can't run it now because the census department still uses Flash Player, and Google Chrome doesn't support Flash Player anymore. But you can go on the Census Department website and pull up the population map and look up the population distribution, the population density of the entire country, of each state, of each city, of each town. And when you do that, you notice a few things that, like I said, some states are more sparsely populated than others, right? Like Texas is pretty huge. It's a pretty enormous state. But California actually has more people in the state than Texas does. So then when you realize that's true, then, well, maybe not you, but this is how I think of these issues. How is it possible that Joseph Biden was able to win 10 million more votes than Barack Obama while also winning 300 fewer districts? Joseph Biden won the most populous districts in the country. That's how that works. So the big population centers, California, the largest cities and districts in California, the largest cities and districts on the eastern seaboard, the largest cities and districts on the southern coast. Biden won those in Pennsylvania. And those are largely urban areas, and their populations are heavily, there's a significant percentage of the populations that are Black and Chicano. Understand that a significant percentage of the population doesn't mean that that's like a majority. Like, I was shocked to look at the population distribution of like LA, of Los Angeles County in California, and see that the population was like the Black population of LA County is like 10% of the entire county. So that means like all the Black people like literally live in Compton. Okay. So when you think of it that way, and then you think of, okay, well, if Obama won more districts, 300 more districts, and this is assuming that this information is accurate. I don't even know if it is. I'm just going to go with the fact that, okay, maybe it's true. That what have you given me here, Neil? I'm going to click on the link. I don't know if I can click on the link. Let's see. Oh, okay. So if you all see in the chat, and I hope you can see it, thank you, Neil. Y'all are the best. Neil has provided a population density map by county. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. I'm going to see if I can copy it into the browser. Let's see. Are you really not going to let me do this? No, I don't want to do that. Okay, if I click on that, it's only going to let me... It's only going to let me. What's it going to let me do? Whoops. Okay, there we go. It is only going to let me share the share your comment. but that's okay. You get the idea. And for those of you who can see the link, please click on it and, understand, so you can understand what I'm saying. So how did Barack Obama not win as many votes as Biden did, even though he won more counties? Because Barack Obama also won a lot of the suburban vote. He won a lot of rural counties too. When in the last election that Obama won, he flipped some rural counties that were Republican before. And those counties were not as heavily populated as the urban areas. That's one reason. The other reason that a lot of progressives seem not to take into account, and I don't know how they do, or I don't know how they don't take this into account, is voter registration. Voter registration increased pretty significantly this time around for a couple of reasons. On the ground, grassroots, work to register more voters, new voters, to get people re-engaged in the voting process, and more people became eligible to vote just by the fact that they turned 20, 18. So I really don't understand how progressives are so quick to dismiss the logical conclusions, or the logical reasons, all the logical reasons for how Biden could win 10 million more votes than Obama while losing, or while not winning 300 counties like Obama did. But I mean, they are really, really committed to that. And it's a little weird to see progressives like going all in. That's right. This election was stolen because how the Democrats are. Now, look, I'm not sitting here defending the Democratic Party. Not at all. I am not defending the Democratic Party. And I am not saying, again, that there have not been irregularities in some of the elections, but there always are. We're talking about a labor-intensive process that in a lot of places is still done by hand. None of the voting machines are connected to the internet. They're not connected to any central network. Each state has its own laws governing how and when and where the results are tabulated. Okay, yeah, mistakes will happen. And in some of the audits, there were adjustments where 100 votes here, or 50 votes there needed to be adjusted. But there is nowhere where there were nearly 12,000 votes that were like literally what Trump says was like hidden under a table somewhere so that he could lose the election. And the other thing that bothers me about progressives agreeing with this stolen election narrative is that Trump's arguments are directed at the states and the counties with the highest concentration of Black voters. This is why he focuses on Pennsylvania, where Philadelphia is, in Georgia, in Fulton County in particular. That's where Atlanta is. So Trump is saying that the Black folks stole the election from him. And progressives, white progressives, are going right along with that shit because of the Democrats, because of what they did, rigging the primaries and not thinking critically about what they're agreeing to and what they're believing. That's dangerous for us. Joel Smith asked if we've had Anoa Shanga on the stream before. Absolutely, we've had Anoa on before, and we plan to have her on again. We just had her on by any means necessary last week, talking about the Georgia runoff election. And for those of you who've been with Luke Mon Nation for a while, that me and Anoa go back. And some of the things I talked about at the beginning of this stream are issues that Anoa and myself and other Black activists went through with these white progressives. So yeah, we'll definitely have her on again. So yeah, the whole issue of Trump saying that the election was stolen and singling out particular states and particular counties. Look at the demographics of those counties and ask yourself, is he really saying that something fishy really happened with the ballots? Or is he actually saying that the Negroes stole the election from him? And you got white progressives who are right about the Democratic Party and their rigging of the primaries, but who are making that false equivalence between the Democrats rigging the primaries to they must have stolen the election, not critically thinking and realizing that they are making a racist argument against Black voters. And you can't tell them that. You can't tell them because they keep wanting to believe that they are right. And this is something GY guy, I hope that's how you pronounce your name. I don't trust the Dems either. Understand, for those of you just hopping on the stream now, I'm not sitting here defending the Democratic Party. They're garbage. I don't trust the Democratic Party either. But the fact that I don't trust the Democratic Party does not mean that I trust the Republicans anymore. It's not a if and they are two wings of the same evil bird. They play the same game to screw all of us. They just play the same game in different ways at different parts of the game. I mean, yes, I don't trust the Democrats either. That does not mean that anybody stole this election from Donald Trump, because let's be, GY, thank you for that. Let's be clear. Excuse me. Sinus issues. Sorry about that. The Democratic Party is not our friend. And we have to be careful. And this is where clear ideology comes in. This is, I think, where a very clear and consistent ideology comes in, and understanding what it is you are fighting for. Okay, fine. I don't trust the Democrats, but I am fighting for justice and liberation for my people. And if I know the Republicans are not going to give me justice and liberation, why the hell would I believe anything they say just because they tell the truth one time about the Democrats? And then there's the other issue about this whole thing, about the protests. All right. So there's the one issue that has made me decide that I've pretty much had it with progressives, because it seems to me since this election that progressives don't know what they stand for. If it is that easy to we save Burger King cups over here. If it is that easy to hop on the bandwagon of right-wing white nationalists, if it's that easy, then I don't know what the hell you believe, and you don't either. We've watched this rightward shift of the so-called progressive movement since 2016. And I have seen progressives make all kinds of excuses for why we need to work with and deal with and, organize with people who do not repudiate their racism, their white supremacy, their xenophobia, their sexism. And can y'all stop bringing up the example of the Black Panther Party and the Rainbow Coalition and the Black Panther Party organizing with the Young Patriots? Because here's what the Black Panther Party and Fred Hampton did. They said, of course, we are going to organize with anybody who understands that we are in a class struggle. but you are going to repudiate your racism. And if you don't, then we can't rock together. That was the criterion for organizing with the Black Panther Party, for for the Young Patriots, which was a largely Southern white organization that did have some racist folks in it, but they couldn't organize with Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party until they repudiated their racist ideology, and they had to be strictly anti-racist. So just stop using the Black Panthers and the Young Patriots organizing progressives as an example of why we need to work with this right wing that we see today. That's not going to repudiate any hatred of people who look like me, just so y'all can get Medicare for all. So that's one issue. Then the other issue is the way the left, the way progressives made such a big deal about violence at the protests this summer. And I had no way to know that what happened this week was going to happen, but I know white folks. Every Black person who is old enough knows that every once in a while, a bunch of white people get together and they rally around some ridiculous ideal or some ridiculous person, and they create some havoc. This happens all the time. Every once in a while, it's cyclical. Every 10 years, every 20 years. It usually not on a national scale like this. Is usually isolated to like I'm thinking about like the Orangeburg massacre, like the Greensboro massacre down in North Carolina, where the cops and the Klan got together and killed some labor organizers, and what was it, 1979? But progressives really did a really awful job of standing up for the ideals of anti-fascism over the summer in response to these protests. Because here you have folks out in the streets protesting, standing up for Black life. Now, this is not a conversation about whether those protests are effective or not. That's another conversation that we might need to have another day. And there's definitely the conversation that we need to have about the kind of messaging that came out of some of the protests. Like, is defund the police enough? I don't think it is. What are we saying when we are, in protesting and getting on our hands and knees and holding our hands up, saying, hands up, don't shoot, like we're begging these people not to shoot us? What kind of message does that send? I think these are definitely discussions that we need to have about the way we go about doing this, but those are internal discussions that we need to have for amongst ourselves. But the public discussions that a lot of white progressives had regarding self-defense, our right to self-defense, and anti-fascists was fucking ridiculous. It was fucking ridiculous to see a bunch of white people talking about, oh, I agree that we need to stand up against racism, but violence is not the way. No, I don't agree with Antifa because they're violent. I don't agree with Antifa because of Black Bloc and they're violent. And I remember saying to folks, Forrest Hinton, I'm going to pop this up here so you can, because I love history, and we're going to get back to that. This is the Greensboro massacre that I mentioned earlier. Thanks, Forrest. And folks tried so hard to have a good ideological discussion with white progressives about why, number one, you don't confuse self-defense with violence. If we are out here protesting for our rights, right? And people who are Nazis, people who they have a Nazi flag, they have a neo-Nazi flag, they've got the, what is it, 6 million weren't enough slogan on their t-shirts. They've got the, whatever insignia or tattoos that make it clear that they are neo-Nazis, that they are fascists. Explain to me how it is that me defending myself against people whose ideology is to perpetuate my death is violence. Their ideology is violent. The fact that they showed up at protests and assaulted people, they threatened people, they threatened violence against people online, on top of the police assaulting people, us defending ourselves, that's not violent. But and the anti-fascists, because that's what Antifa is, it is short for anti-fascist. The fascists came out with the intention to harm, abuse, and kill us. The anti-fascists stepped in and protected us. And you had white progressives on here talking about they're against Antifa because they're violent. And I saw this going on for too long, and I knew that something was going to happen that was going to bite those folks in the ass. And here we are. Here we are. The fascists have shown you exactly what they want to do, because they've done it. They have caused the deaths of 5 people. And while what was going on, thank you, Ryan, Camp Auschwitz sweatshirts, that's what it was. Yeah. And while that was going on in the nation's capital, other fascists, other pro-Trump fascists were having similar rallies around the country, and they were assaulting and causing havoc there too. So I'm sitting there looking at this and I'm saying, I wonder what the I hate Antifa because they're violent progressives have to say to this shit. I wonder what they got to say now. I mean, because I'm looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if this is what it takes for them to be afraid enough of racist, right-wing Trump supporters for them to feel comfortable with Antifa now. Because see, this entire argument about among progressives about I don't like Antifa because they're violent contributed to the mischaracterization of Antifa that's going on right now, because the left did not stand by, defend, and adequately and every day repeatedly hammer home Antifa is anti-fascist. And yes, some people did. I don't want anybody to be like, well, that's not me. Stop doing that. If it don't apply, let it fly. I ain't talking about you. But there were enough progressives who were on this I don't support Antifa because they resort to violence ideology, that you ceded the ground about Antifa, about anti-fascism to the fascists. You let them define what Antifa is. And yes, the media was very complicit in a lot of that. Absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But white progressives online did so much damage in being wishy-washy and mealy-mouthed about supporting Antifa that the media and the right wing, the actual fascists, were able to hijack that narrative and turn Antifa into something that it is not. So I put some of that responsibility on the white progressives that I went back and forth with for months. And not just last summer, but before. This has been going on for a long time, where I would be involved in organizations and we'd be planning a demonstration, and some white person will say, well, you have to declare that you're nonviolent. We have to make sure that we declare that we're nonviolent. No, I do not. I do not have to declare that I am nonviolent to make you comfortable, because nobody who is opposing us is going to come out there and declare, well, okay, we're not going to kill you. We're just going to come out here and shout at you that we disagree with you. If they get a chance to throw a punch and knock me out, they will. And I know this from experience. But again, too many white progressives did not want to listen to Black progressives and Black activists of color. That really was the bottom line. They just didn't want to listen to us. So now you've got this thing where, and this is not to say that, the fascist white people weren't going to call Antifa whatever they wanted. Sure, they were going to. But it is very interesting that before Wednesday, when the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys and the other Trump supporters came for those test protests, those test rallies, because that's what they were, and they hung around at night and strolled on down to Black Lives Matter Plaza and assaulted those Black people, mostly Black people, holding space and demonstrating there. Where were all these progressives protecting and defending those folks from the fascists? Y'all have so indoctrinated yourselves to distance yourselves from the ideology of anti-fascism that you didn't even realize that it's your fucking job to be an anti-fascist. It is your damn job to be an anti-fascist and stand in between the fascists and the people the fascists want to kill. That is, if you call yourself an ally. But a whole bunch of folks, whole bunch of white progressives call themselves our allies, comrades, but shat on Antifa because they were violent and didn't show up and protect people who were in the crosshairs of Trump's fascist supporters over and over again. So that's another issue. So then the other issue, is this whole thing of tone policing and cancel culture. I actually thought this was kind of funny, because I always thought it was kind of weird how my entire experience online has been, regardless of what it was I was doing or participating in, or my entire experience online involved competing with white people who ignore race as an issue, and don't want to talk about race as an issue, and dealing with white people who accuse me of being racist because I talk about race, because I talk about racism, because I talk about white supremacy, and I talk about white supremacist violence and why it's important to talk about those things. And I talk about racist capitalism and how, yes, class is important, but racism is inextricably tied to classism. Classism is inextricably tied to racism. You cannot talk about one and not talk about the other. This ain't Denmark. And even if it were, you would still have to have that conversation in Denmark, because don't they have that racist ass Black Peter? So everywhere around the world, the idea of white supremacy is inextricably tied to capitalism. So there is no class struggle without a struggle around racial injustice. And you can't have a struggle or a discussion about racial injustice without having a discussion about classism. But we're doing this dance in between white people who only want to talk about class and thinking that that's going to solve all the problems, and then get offended when Black people are like, yeah, this isn't it, that's going to help, but then we're still going to have to deal with racism. Then they get indignant. Well, why do you make everything about race? And that's the progressives. That's the progressives saying that. And then you've got the progressives on the other end literally asking, am I a racist? Because I call out white progressives on their white supremacist ideology that they refuse to recognize exists in their head and in their actions. So then you get this thing, where all the time you're having somebody tell you that what you're saying is wrong. You're so in division and you shouldn't be saying that. And you can't criticize this person because they're truth tellers. And, this whole tone policing and canceling. Oh, you can't cancel people. I mean, me calling people out, and even, Black people with much larger and much more influential platforms than I have, them calling out the racism, the racial blindness, the white supremacy, the xenophobia, the classism, the sexism, the ableism of influential journalists, intellectuals, whomever. I mean, us calling that out, it doesn't, your feelings hurt? Your feelings hurt because somebody held you to account for your shit, when every damn day I look at the comments on our streams, and at least two, 3 times a week. Well, we don't do the streams that regularly anymore, but 2 out of 4 streams, there is always some white person on there calling us racist, saying racist things. And then I have to be careful that I don't dismiss when people are calling me to account when I do get something wrong. And I have to be humble enough to be like, yeah, I fucked that up. And not take it personally. I mean, that's mature. That's maturity. That's political maturity. It's maturity in general. It's also a part of the struggle. You have to be willing to be pulled by the collar by people you're in community with, and trust that they have your best interest at heart. But I didn't see a whole lot of that from a whole lot of white progressives who didn't like when Black folks were challenging Bernie Sanders on his really ridiculously insufficient and insulting campaigning that he didn't do in the South, that he should have done a lot better at. Those of us on the outside weren't the only ones who said it. Black people who were inside his campaign said it twice, both times. But according to white progressives, oh, we were mean and we don't like Bernie Sanders and we're troublemakers. And what do we want? We want the same effort in our districts for our vote that white people get in theirs. That's what we want. And when we saw that it wasn't happening, we called it out. That's why, when Black people challenged Noam Chomsky on some of the things he said about race not being that important. Oh, it's important, but we have to deal with economic issues first. Oh, you can't challenge Noam Chomsky. It's Noam Chomsky. I don't care. So what? I mean, what is he, magical? What's he gonna do? I mean, what's he going to do because I disagree with what he said? And this whole thing about canceling. Oh, Black Twitter canceled this person. Unless I got you fired, nobody's canceled. Just because we point out that your ideology, that your analysis, that your comments are shitty. And we post the screenshots and we explain why this is a shitty comment. It's a racist comment. It's a classist comment. That's not canceling anybody. That's just showing people how shitty even influential people can be. Everybody fucks up. We all do it. Everybody. I have said some things online that I've had to go back and be like, oops, I apologize. I shouldn't have said that. Or have had to correct myself. Yeah, we all do. And some people are intentionally pandering to the right still. And this is why they were called out, making excuses for Trump supporters. Well, they're not all racist. The fuck they aren't all racist. If Satan runs for election and Satan's platform is, I am going to destroy these people, I am going to create hell on earth, I am going to melt all of the believers in Abrahamic faiths down to puddles of mud, vote for me, and people vote for Satan, how in the hell are you going to say, well, people voted for Satan, but they really didn't want him to do anything bad. They really didn't agree with the things that he said they were going to do. They voted for Satan because he talked about jobs. What the So yeah, Trump talked about jobs, completely lying about jobs, but he also talked about being being a serial sexual assaulter, being able to shoot people in the middle of Fifth Avenue and not losing any supporters. He was xenophobic. He was racist. That was from the very beginning. And you have intellectuals and journalists and politicos and all these people talking about, well, all Trump supporters aren't racist. The fuck they aren't. Yes, they are. Because they voted for a man who espoused those evil, hateful ideas. And those ideas were okay with them as long as they believed they were going to get what they wanted. It didn't matter who else was hurt. So yeah, those people, yeah, they are racist. And we pointed that out. And that was ridiculous to keep saying that about these people after 2-3 years. And the things this man did, even though we told you from the beginning, but we were canceling people because, we're not allowing for a free discourse of ideas. How many more ideas do we need to have to exchange about this whole Trump situation? And this is a situation that exists because we have never had the exchange of ideas that people want all the time about white supremacy in this country any other time that is committed by any other person, including Democrats. Y'all didn't want to talk about Barack Obama and his bullshit. So then when Donald Trump does the same things that Barack Obama does, but he does them in a way that makes it just look really unsavory. Oh, now it's terrible. But it was imperialist and white supremacist and deadly and awful when Obama did it too. Look up who built those cages. Look up the administration that was in power when those fucking cages at the border were built. It wasn't Trump. So then progressives are all on, you can't criticize our progressive heroes. You can't say anything mean about Bernie because Bernie's trying to reach out to Trump voters because they're poor too. And we need all the support we can get. And here we are over here like, well, you could work with us. Idea. I don't know. Yeah, just a thought. But no, white progressives are too busy telling us to shut up and stop criticizing their favorites, don't cancel their favorites. So instead of working with Black and Latino and, Chicano, see, I slip sometimes too. Instead of working with Black and Chicano and LGBTQ and radical and disabled organizers, radical people, too many white progressives would rather court support from the right than work with radicals because they wanted too much to stick with electoral politics. honestly, there's so much celebrity worship in the especially the online progressive circles. It's ridiculous. It's no wonder y'all don't know what your ideology is. Y'all are so fixated on personalities, Bernie Sanders and AOC and the squad, giving them nicknames like it's a fucking baseball team. And then when Republicans turn around and do the same thing to mock you, oh, then your feelings get hurt. But we radicals are over here on the side trying to tell you, look, stop making heroes out of these people because they're inside the machinery. They're not going to change anything from the inside because the machine is not going to let them. You need to start organizing on the outside. You need to start organizing with radicals on the outside of the system. But no, progressives don't want to do that. So that's a good point. That's a good point, GY. That is a very good point. That there aren't even really progressives, not for real, because Jesse Jackson, say what you want about the man since then, but when he ran for office, somebody made this point somewhere. I think it was on a show that we did on By Any Means Necessary, about Jesse Jackson having real progressive policies, ran for president, and won a whole hell of a lot of white votes in the primaries, in the Democratic primaries. The Southern white vote, the rural white vote. But do you notice that Jesse Jackson had a blueprint for success for the Democratic Party, and they didn't even follow his blueprint. The Democratic Party wouldn't even follow Jesse Jackson's blueprint for success, but they talking about they're the party of inclusiveness. Get that. So this is where I feel like I have to, I got to leave progressives alone, at least online. I have to focus way more on radical organizing, the organizations I'm involved in, Black Alliance for Peace, Pan-African Community Action. I have comrades in the Party of Socialism and Liberation, the Answer Coalition. I have comrades there. Local organization, Pan-African Community Actions is a local DC organization. All African People's Revolutionary Party, the Umoja People's Progress Party in Baltimore. Virginia Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality over in Richmond. These are radical formations that are doing work on the ground. Nationally, Black Alliance for Peace is national. All those other organizations are more localized, with the exception of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. They're an international organization, and I need to focus way more on internationalism and Pan-Africanism, because those are my ideals. I am a socialist of the Marxist vein, of the Pan-Africanist vein, and I'm an internationalist. I can't do this milquetoast, middle of the road, let's appeal to the right and see if they'll come play with us. Let's see if we can get in the Democratic Party and move the party to the left brand of progressives in 2021. I can't do it anymore. It's not there. I think there comes a point where you have to focus on whatever your strengths, well, maybe not your strengths, focus on what it is that is important to you and where you want to go. And if anybody wants to come along with you, then welcome. There's a lot of room, but I'm not having a whole lot of more arguments with a bunch of progressives who think it is more important to try to appeal to the right than it is to organize with the radical left that is fighting for actual liberation for all people. So that's right, GY. Marcus Garvey, he is a personal hero of mine. And you can't really see it, but that's a bust of Malcolm X right there. That's where I am for 2021. And I guess I'll have more to say about this Capitol riot business later on as things shake out. I don't know. It just seemed so very anticlimactic to me. But I will say that while people are calling it a failed anything, whether this, what happened on Wednesday was actually wildly successful for the right, for those very right-wing nationalist, fascist, white supremacist forces that I've been talking about, that white progressives have been trying to cozy up to get Medicare for all. Wednesday was a victory for them because they were able to see just how far they could get and just how much support they had on the inside. So you're right, Ryan. Next week will be interesting. They will be back here in DC. That Wednesday will not be the last time these people will do something like this. And next week won't be the last time they do something like this either. They're not going away. If people had paid serious attention to them even over the summer and took them for the serious threat that they were then, and they were showing people what they were willing to do, driving cars into protests and assaulting people, intimidating people with guns. They were showing you then actually murdering people. This Rittenhouse kid who is now free on bond. They showed you then just how far they're willing to go for their ideology. My question is, how far are you? How far are you willing to go to get what you want? Are you willing to organize with Black radicals, with Chicano radicals, with LGBTQ liberation fighters, with the disabled? Are you willing to organize with the actual left now? With the socialists, with the Marxists, with the radicals, with the communists? Are you willing to now organize with those folks? Or are you still mad because somebody's canceling you and, you know, people are saying mean things about Bernie Sanders and AOC and Noam Chomsky, and, you know, maybe you're still trying to find some class solidarity among the MAGA supporters? This day, choose which side you're on, because I've chosen. And I just don't have any more time to continue to entertain folks who are still mealy-mouthed and on the fence. My life depends on it, and I just don't have time to do it anymore. So let me look at some of y'all's comments. GY says, if they're not talking reparations, I'm not even hearing those so-called progressives. That word. David Otner says, libertarian a la Ayn Rand philosophies. I've seen it. People think I'm like exaggerating, like I'm making this stuff up. Nope, not at all. Excuse me. This is a good question. David said, what's with Mitch McConnell and Jerry Curl Paul? They have the largest constituency per capita on public assistance, yet consistently get reelected based on their rock rib Republican and libertarian philosophies. This is where white supremacy comes in. You can't. The only way you can convince white people with nothing that you are on their side is if you play up the idea that it is their whiteness that connects them to you, and that they benefit from that, and that you are protecting them and their whiteness from these Black folks, from these gays, from these immigrants who are trying to take your stuff. That's the only way that reasoning works. If these poor white people in these folks' districts had an actual class consciousness, these arguments would not work. They wouldn't work. But they don't have a class consciousness. So it makes sense to them that the Blacks and the gays and, the immigrants are taking their stuff, and Mitch McConnell's he's gonna protect us. He's going to protect us from those socialists trying to take all the things, while, actual socialist countries are providing for their citizens, and there's no homelessness in Venezuela. But these folks voting for Mitch McConnell and these Republicans, they can barely pay their rent, and the government doesn't give a shit. McConnell don't care. So yeah, that is a good point, David, that this is where class consciousness would be incredibly important. But this is also where racism is extremely important, because it explains why people who should have a solid class consciousness don't, because they are so inextricably tied to the ideology of white supremacy, and their whiteness is what's important to them, and they want to protect that. They think that we're a threat to their whiteness. So you can't have this conversation about class without having a conversation about race. That was a great point. All right, y'all, thanks so much for joining me on this impromptu session of Live in Lukman Nation. We have a special show coming Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. I am so very excited about this. This was not the first time that the Capitol building was the scene of I don't want to use a word that doesn't describe what happened before that needs to be talked about. But this wasn't the first time that people took their grievances to the Capitol building and broke up into place with their grievances. The incident that the media refuses to talk about happened a few decades ago, but the people and the reasons were very different from these folks. Very different and extremely important, and absolutely connected to struggles that are going on to this very day. So look, tune in Wednesday at 7 p.m. when we are going to have some friends over to talk about that very important history and why it matters now. So thanks a lot, y'all, so much for joining us. Again, follow us on Twitter, Lukman Nation 1, the number 1, no space. Like us on Facebook, Coffee, Current Events, and Politics in Lukman Nation. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Here we are in Lukman Nation. Share our videos, invite folks over, and appreciate you so much. As always, be very, very good to each other. And as Fred Hampton used to say, I say to you, peace, if you're willing to fight for it.
How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all down before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Hope believed in me, pull up through some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery.